Hello, my name is Fond. I am the DM of a new Dungeons & Dragons game that I've started. It's titled The Throne of Rihdar. And as such, as the DM, I stream it, I plan on uploading the videos to YouTube, and I also want to do DM diaries. So more or less for every session, I will make a video, as now, talking about what happened, my thoughts, how it could have improved, what the players did, such and so forth. I should start out because I know some of my players watch my YouTube channel. They don't know I'm doing a DM diary, but some of them watch it and they might find this video. I will start out by saying I'm not going to do spoilers for net sessions, so you don't have to worry about that. However, as I mentioned in our session 0, there is this idea of verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is the belief in the second reality or in the reality of the world. So I go through a lot of effort and a lot of painstaking effort to make sure verisimilitude is kept in my D&D game so the players feel like the world is real. Now, I don't think watching this video or these DM diaries is necessarily going to be like, oh my god, I feel like the world's not real anymore. However, I do think there will be some parts that, if you watch them, it might make you lose some of the magic. However, that's also me assuming that you're involved enough to already be engrossed in the world. But the point is, you're fine to watch these. It's just there's the potential of me explaining stuff that the NPCs do that I wouldn't normally explain to you because it's a DM diary, and you might just be like, oh well, it's like okay, but at the same time you might not care anyway. But I'm not going to do spoilers. I'm just going to go through what I'm going through. Anyway, we've had 2 sessions before this. They were our session 0.5s. More or less, they went over combat, some roleplay. It was situated in the Nero Colosseum. It is the Colosseum of the Republic of Kadoy, in which the party first meets each other. They're partaking in a tournament hosted by High Premier Councilman Alfonso and Ditzer. So this is where they meet for our session 0.5s that happened in the last couple of weeks to learn basically what they can do for combat, what they can do in roleplay, understand their characters a little bit, and as such. And it was all canon as well. Everything that happened is canon. Those NPCs, it's not like a throwaway session just for practice. It was a month. It's set up a month before session 1. So they did that, and they did combat. It took longer than I thought. They did combat, they met NPCs, they learned how to work together, learned some of their own abilities. I like starting at level 1, so all my players are level 1, so it's not like they have too much of anything to worry about, besides the fact that they can die really easily. They don't really have to worry about what kind of spells they have, and all that nonsense. So that was a fun way. Introduced a lot of important NPCs. I'm the kind of person I throw in a lot of secrets, so I've already, just even in the session 0.5s that were practice, I've already set up a lot of unnoticeable information where they might not think much about it, but in reality it's actually very important and will potentially mean a lot. Also in those sessions, they created more problems than they started with. So in my setting, we start in, the world is Orbitus. Orbitus, the ring planet. It is a planet without a moon that has 2 metallic rings circling it. And on this planet, there is a very wealthy republic, the Republic of Kadoy. That's where we start. And this republic is extremely humanistic. It does not like non-humans very much. And the way it describes it is anyone who's not a human is usually a non-civilized race. That's like monsters, goblins, anything that's not really in a civilization. Then you have civilized non-human races, which are higher than that. So like elves, dwarfs, they're not really respected, but they're tolerated. So there's a lot of racism always involved. And 4/5 of the party are not human. And one of them is also a non-civilized race that is not known. So it's, whenever they're out there fighting against humans to a crowd of thousands and thousands of humans. Uh, Whatever they do does not help. And there was a certain fight in which it was a bunch of orphans, 5 orphans who were young kids who were pretending to be innocent, who were actually spellcasters. They all knew cantrips and the shield spell. So they're pretty nasty. They give the party a run for their money. But, the humans who watched these non-humans beat up these kids did not see it that way. They saw it as like these monsters are beating up these human children, these poor human children. So they've created a whole... There's so many problems that they've accidentally put on themselves. I put them in this situation, but the way they went about it and the choices they decided were in the direction of where it's like, okay, this is going to potentially be negative in the future. But anyway, so we did those the last couple of weeks and introduced some characters. We didn't finish it off. We still had a bit of time. So what I did for yesterday, we did session 1, which is the start of the campaign. I should give you the premise of the campaign from the get-go. The premise of the campaign is that the players start off being defeated by the big bad evil guy, Kronos the Shamed. The game starts, and they've surrendered, and they're at his mercy because he just outclassed them. So basically, the premise is that they are going to be slaves / henchmen to the big bad guy, and it's up to them to decide if they want to try and get away, if they're fine with it and they want to be evil. A bunch of moral dilemmas are going to be throughout this game whenever they have to start doing things like killing innocents or doing something they don't want to do, and they have to try and get away because they're going to basically be like shackled to him in some extent, so that they can't just like run. They'll have to take care of some things. So that's how the game starts. But we didn't quite finish session 0.5. So what I did is I decided to start out the game in kind of a dream sequence where they're basically reliving the past. So they're reliving the past, and they keep hearing this voice in their head that's echoing, like saying stuff like, why, or how, or other things. And every time this voice comes, it usually, in their memories, they like kind of teleport. Like they're kind of like in your dream and you're just like in different places. So it strips a lot of information. So I was doing that at the beginning. And basically I was using this as a way to describe the background information, like important key people and details, so the players would understand their role, because they were, after being part of the tournament, they were invited to join a new secret anti-terrorist group that has been made to capture Kronos the Shamed. Kronos the Shamed used to be a really well-known hero who's now gone rogue. So the Senate of Cardoi is trying to capture him, and so they're creating this new organization. So I needed to describe in background what this organization was, what it was about, what their job was, how they became part of it, also some other things, how they ended up getting to a month later, so we do a time skip, a month later, how they end up being at Mount Matrad, which is an inactive volcano where Kronos the Shamed is, in front of him, captured, defeated, and at his mercy. So I decided to do this weird idea where it's basically a dream sequence where it's like, imagine if you've ever seen a movie like hypnotism, where you hear the therapist, the voice echoes in your head as it's guiding you, asking you guiding questions, and then your brain goes to this new scene. It's kind of like that. I did that. I went through people's backstories, through the relative information that the group had, and eventually ended off where they opened their eyes and they realized that they're in front of Kronos the Shamed. Kronos the Shamed has been basically probing their minds this entire time. So from the very start of the session till the reveal, Kronos the Shamed has already had them captured. It's basically been an entire background explanation that he's been going through, questioning them about. So I'm sure they were aware of that earlier on. It's not like it's hard to figure out that, okay, something weird's going on, and it's like we're being questioned. And they also knew the start of the game. So it's not, I'm sure they understood what was happening. But we get there, and it reveals that it's Kronos the Shamed who they went to go capture, to defeat, but instead he is not as weak as they expected, and he is actually far more powerful, probably the most powerful person they've ever met, and they're completely at his whim. So there was a few things I want to talk about. I personally, as a DM, I rather enjoyed the creation, preparation, and basically the execution of all of this. It most definitely looks better on paper than it was executed in life for a few reasons. Number one, used to DM in the past, but it's been a long time since I've DM'd, so I'm still really rusty. A lot of things I need to work on. Hold on, someone's knocking on my door. I'll be right back. 1 second. As I was saying, my players, yes, they probably understood what was going on when it was revealed. But I was wanting to do this. I basically had this idea that to set up more or less set up the campaign. This is session 1, in which I want to set up the tone, the ideas of the campaign, and the seriousness of it, more or less. So I ended up deciding to do something that I would normally not suggest to ever do in a game, and I don't think normally works out. And even my players didn't complain, but definitely criticized it a little bit, which I knew they would. I warned them in advance. I'm like, this is how the session is going to go. For some of you, it might be a little bit boring. It might not be very fun. So more or less, see it like this. I have 5 players. That means whenever I was doing the bad story thing, and that was basically me narrating, I had to go through 5 different players' bad stories. I only did part of their bad stories, but it's more or less, it was Kronos probing who they are as people, why they're doing this, and it was more or less he was probing their deepest sins, fears, things that happened to them, more or less to understand them. So I had to do this each character, you know. And another reason I wanted to do this was because I feel like I'm a kind. I like DMing where I like it where it's the world doesn't really give a fuck about the players. The world's gonna go on no matter what. And there's some big bad guys. The players can easily get in over the head. Combat's not built for the players. They got to figure out how to solve problems because the world's not built around them. However, I like that, but I also like to incorporate their bad stories, their characters, and twist that into this world. So it's like they have something to grab onto. While all of the world is not built for them, they do have something to grab onto, to latch onto as a character, as a player. They have something there that is for them, that is built for them. So I wanted to start out by doing a slight thing where I'm explaining their bad stories. So they, as players, can understand their characters more. And also so each of the other players can know a little bit about everyone's character. Because at this point, they've been working together as a squad for the last month. So naturally, they would have talked to each other in character about some of their bad story, some of what they're going through. So this is also a way to allow the other players to have something to talk about or use in-game. And because if you think about it, whenever you ask a player to write a bad story, a lot of players don't like it. I think almost all of my players did not like writing their bad story. It felt tedious to them. It took them a lot. I gave them a deadline, and they just like totally shot past the deadline every time. They didn't take the responsibility to do it. And it's not, they didn't take the responsibility. I'm not trying to say it's because they're bad people. The reason they didn't take the responsibility to finish what I asked them to by the deadline, which while to some extent feels almost disrespectful to me, I understand it because unlike me, who likes bad stories, who likes information, and understands how important and that it will probably make a better experience in my game for them as people don't find it interesting. They don't find writing a bad story and trying to come up with these characters and why they know them and why they should care about them. They don't seem to find that as they're not as passionate about that as I am. So I understand why they did that. And most of them, they all more or less achieved or did what I wanted them to. But I'm sure to them at that point, it felt more like a chore. Sure, they have a bad story. That's great. But it's just words on a piece of paper. Why does it matter? It's just words on a piece of paper. So I wanted to take this session 1, as a means to turn that word that's on paper and bring it out of the paper and put it into reality right away. Let them know that this is what happened. This is real stuff that happened to you. You know, I took key figures from them. I used words. For example, Hawkins. He is a pirate lizard folk played by Swills. The lizard folk in my world were, for a long time, part of the Eternal Pats, basically a very justice, holy order of people who worked for virtuous Emperor Rihdar. Rihdar's now dead, and before he died, he ended up trying to genocide his holy warriors for whatever reason. He got taken over by madness, I suppose. And so now the lizard folk are very pitiful. They feel like they did something wrong, and they're trying to atone for it, so they're very weak. They basically fell from glory, and everyone pities them now. They're not strong warriors anymore. And so through his childhood, his father, every time Hawkins would ask, why aren't you helping defend us? Why aren't you protecting us? His father, Swills wrote this in his best story, his father would always say, it's retribution. So, for example, I literally took those exact words. Whenever he asked his father what it is, why he's not protecting him in the bad story moment, that's literally the only thing his father said to him. It's retribution. So I was literally took straight from the bad story because I wanted those words that the players wrote down to transform from just words to, this is real. This is you. This is part of you. What you wrote is you. So it changes from the idea of like, okay, this is just paper. This is written nonsense. The DM somewhat forced us to do. To like, okay, this is my connection to the world. This is actually what's happening, and the DM is actually using this. So that was the second reason I wanted to do something like that. But as I was saying, it most definitely to the players felt. I warned them beforehand because I knew it'd be like this. It's basically one of the biggest sins of a DM is to write a novel instead of write an outline for the players. So basically for session 1, I decided to write a novel. I knew what I was doing, and I don't suggest you do it unless you know what you're doing about it, and don't do it very often. This was probably a one-time thing. It was basically, one of my players, Un, said, it's like we watched he said 5 hour, but we really only played for about 4 hours. With a lot of people were late or we took time off, a break. But he said, it's kind of like we were watching like a 4 hour long cutscene almost, like an introduction to an MMO or to a game, an introduction to something. And now that we're getting more access to our bodies, we're actually entering the world. So the session 1, I think, did a really good job of setting up people's bad stories, like how important these are, helping show how powerful this person that they're now kind of in service to is. But it was most definitely less D&D and less fun for the players than it was for me. That is for sure. Because, a player wants to come in, they want to role play. They want to roll dice. They want to kill stuff. They want to play D&D. They don't want to sit there and listen to you, the DM, tell a novel. Even if it's about their character. They might care a little bit, but even if it's about their character, it's still more exhausting. Basically tedious, While it's important to players, it's more of an annoyance, I think. Which is unfortunate, but that's just usually how it comes off, I think. But once they woke up from their little daze situation, they were face to face with Kronos, who started asking them, more or less was trying to setting up the scene of Kronos as a rather cold, unchanging villain. His eyes, he just has judgmental red eyes. His face does not change as he looks at them. His voice does not change. He is cold, flat, almost emotionless. And he was basically, he asked, why do you think it's fair that you killed my men? Is it because it was their job to protect this place? And then, the players would go on, and more or less the players would give an answer like, it's war. I think it's fair because, yes, they knew what they were getting into. So then Kronos goes on. So then it's fair if I kill you, isn't it? You're just doing your job trying to come here. So he basically tried to... I was trying to show that he's in some ways, he's sadistic and calculative, where he was calculating their response and then using their response to more or less shut down any attempt they would have at trying to explain why he shouldn't kill them. And the entire time, they had no access to their body. Kronos is just so powerful that more or less his words and actions, these level 1 adventurers cannot get out of. And, basically, this goes on and on, them talking for a while, him asking these questions, until he decides he's going to kill them. There's no way for them to get out. So using his mind powers, whatever the force, he makes the players basically point their weapons at their selves. The ones who have sharp weapons point it to their neck. Those with guns put the barrel to their head. And then then obviously I do a thing where it's like you hear and everything's blinded, as if it was like the two guns going off. I'm a bit sadistic. I think there's a good way. I think you can build suspense in character, but I also think the DM can build suspense outside of character as well. So more or less, I didn't have the players roll for anything. The previous 2 hours of background, it was in the past. They didn't need to roll. They rolled for nothing. They basically sit there, role played with me, or listened to their story, or listened to me narrate, whatever. And it was like, they're probably blah. And then as soon as the two guns go off, I tell them to roll, each of them to roll a d20. And to be fair, they all rolled really well, besides one of them. But even though they rolled well, I was like, oh no, I can't believe. I faked. I was acting as if something really bad was going to happen. Like I was like, oh God. Like I actually had something planned. And then I ended off by saying, okay, I need 10 minutes to figure this out. I need 10 minutes to figure this out. Just we'll take a break. We took a break. One of the players ended up disappearing for like 25 minutes. Heaven forbid. Okay. So it ended up being a long break. But they came back, and I asked them to roll again. And they basically rolled again. The second roll was one to see how much in shock they were. Because to them, they were actually about to die. So I was asked them to roll another d20 to see who would come out of basically shock first and realize what's going on. In reality, the two Banes was actually the doors they previously came into swinging open. Someone pushed the doors open, and they banged against the wall, which are the two Banes that was the gunshots. And this entire time, it created this. Since I made that roll, that literally meant nothing. The players who I intentionally didn't have roll anything the entire session, they rolled nothing. So this was their only roll. They expected this roll was something extremely important. Like, extremely important. Why would the DM only make us roll one time? We're about to die. What does this mean? Why is he taking a 10-minute break? You see, by doing that, it makes them assume that there's something bad. It makes them assume that something's wrong. And then in the session, they asked me, so what was that roll about? And I say, it wasn't about anything. It was just a fake roll to build suspension. And then they look at me and they say, that's a good cover-up. That's great. That's a great cover-up. And that right there, you don't say yes or no to it. Even now, if they're watching this, they're probably questioning if I just added this in here. They're probably trying to figure out if I'm actually being serious right now, or if I'm actually trying to cover it up. They don't know. But that's how you know you succeed with it. Because they assume that you are still trying to cover it up whenever you tell them why you did it. They're like, okay, buddy, that's a good excuse. That's a good excuse. Really, because I made them roll a second time to see how fast they came out of shock. So they're like, you really made us roll that second time to veto the first one, even though it was technically worse than the first one. And, so basically they have this belief that something happened, or that something bad really happened that I took care of. But in reality, nothing happened at all. That roll meant nothing at all, besides to make it memorable, suspenseful, and make them really feel like something important happened in that moment. So they'll realize that basically to empower the moment that I was creating in roleplay by using my ability as a DM. But who knows? They might not believe me. That's probably for the best. Will they decide if they watch this video? Will they decide to think I'm serious or not? Either way, it's a win for me. It's done what I want. But we did that. But in reality, it was Alomi, and the Aarakocra strategist, slamming up the doors, running in. He's like, "Your Majesty, there's intruders. They've killed our guards." And then he realizes that His Majesty's already caught them, which instantly takes this serious tone of them about to die, instantly 180s it into like, okay, well, this is just silly now. This is just silly by introducing a silly character. So then from that point, he comes in. Then the Lizard Folk commander comes in as well, carrying bodies. And I use Lizard Folk. I speak as Lizard Folk, kind of like how Matt Colville does his Dragonborn, because they don't have the vocal cords. So it's like, "Your Majesty, I just got back and I can report. Or wait." Where their voice is almost strained simply because they don't have the vocal cords to speak common normally. So I used that. I brought that in. And then I did several things where Alomi, the Aarakocra, is silly. He's just talking to all the players, trying to lighten up the mood. The players were very, very serious. Like, I was genuinely surprised by how like stone cold they were playing it. They were like, "We're ready to die." Kronos tries to give them a last wish, a last words. They either mock him, or most of them don't say anything, or they mock him, or like they played it like they were bad at. They played it like they were going to die, and they were going to die, their own way. Like they didn't give up at all. I was like, wow, that's hardcore, Jesus. I'm just like, okay, well, this is serious, I guess. I really expected some of them to try and get out of it, but they were more willing to die than I thought they were. So who knows? But more or less, that I started introducing these characters, lighten up the mood. Alomi, the Aarakocra, is talking to everyone. Then you have Bulk, the Lizard Folk, who is also the commander for Kronos, asking Kronos if he can spare Hawkins, his brethren. And he even offered to take Hawkins in as an apprentice if he was spared, because he's never met another Lizard Folk who is brave enough, though perhaps foolish, brave enough to attempt to, assault a fort, So, but it was very obvious that Bulk obviously cared about only Hawkins, because he was a Lizard Folk and none of the others. Kronos shot this down for obvious reasons. And more or less things kept going on. More things were introduced. The bodies ended up being brought in. Kronos ended up getting the spirits of these 3 dead soldiers that the party killed to get in there, raised to ask them their final wish, and in order to basically let them witness the death of their murderers. Their final wish was simply to let their family know that they're thankful for everything. And they also wished that Kronos does not kill the party. So the party was, ironically, I don't know if they, obviously to the players it might feel like plot armor, which kind of is in some ways, because this is how the story starts. And I hope they see it more like, I hope they see it less like plot armor and more like these 3 soldiers were extremely virtuous, humble, and kind, instead of like, okay, the DM is just, this is the DM's way of being, you guys are alive. Because even though that the party killed these 3 soldiers and they would never be able to see their families again, they used their final wish to basically spare the lives of those who killed them. They said to Kronos, "Your Majesty, these fighters are very strong. We don't have enough fighters. It would be a waste to kill them here. How about you use them? They would help bolster our troops. They would be good assets." So they convinced Kronos, who says he never rejects last wish, to basically spare them. And so basically these 3 soldiers that they killed, that originally are the reason why they were about to be executed, ended up coming back to be the reason that they get to live. So I hope the players end up taking that less for granted and understand the value of what that means. But who knows? So basically they get spared, and then Kronos doesn't trust them though, so he is going to he calls up another member. They've also already taught up Kavahold. He's he's like a minotaur, like a goat dude who's really old, who did the magic to lift the spirits, and then he ended up cremating these 3 soldiers, because if you don't cremate them in my world, bodies reanimate. Not as zombies or skeletons, they reanimate and they're preserved, and they mindlessly walk. This is called the Walkers of Perduta. They mindlessly walk until eventually they float up into the sky and they go to the rings to be reincarnated. So that's a belief. So some people believe, if you believe in the Church of Rings, you support the Walk of Perduta, where people die, they reanimate, they walk until eventually they get taken back up to the rings. And if you believe in the Orbis Triumphant, which believes more in Orbis as a planet than the rings, you usually cremate people. So to avoid them standing up and walking away, they basically cremated these 3 bodies in front of them. And then Kronos calls up Spark and tells Spark, a very shy girl who seems very nervous, shy, almost unsure of herself, to take the 5 of them, who are now technically members of this group, and muzzle them. He tells her to muzzle them, which is his form of saying, shackle them so we can control them, because they're dangerous. So that's basically where we end, because we didn't have any more time to go on. So we ended with Spark leading them out of the room, and which was kind of the simulation of you're kind of out of this, you're getting farther and farther out of the story mode into more of you have control. So it definitely did what I wanted it to. For the players, it probably wasn't as fun. But I think what I've come to realize is there's a stark difference. I should explain this first. Firstly, 2 of the players DM games I'm part of. The other 2 players, and even one of the DMs, I play in games with or have played in games with. So I know there's only one player who I've never played with, but also I know him pretty well as a person. So virtually I know the play style of all these people. I know how they DM. I know how they play as characters. I know what they care about. And it's really weird to me. It's not weird, but it's sort of it's not even a burden. It's not, I can't want to call it an annoyance either, because it's a hard terminology. It's more like maybe an unfortunate, I think, because none of them really have the same play style as I do as a player or as a DM, and they also don't carry the same passion about the game. I'm not saying they're not passionate about D&D. They're just passionate about it in different ways. For example, I'll explain how I am. I'm a person who is very, very, very keen on information. I take hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes during a game of D&D. I use that information. I remember things people say. I'm always paying attention to words, terminologies, and basically like looking for secrets, looking for information, writing down things that seem a little bit weird that might come up later, so I can put things together like a little puzzle. So that side of me as a player translates into me as a DM, and none of my players have that same passion of note-taking or seemingly paying attention to this weird, like really basically undertoned information and ideologies. So in a weird way, I do all this stuff, but I'm not sure if I'm not really afraid of it, but I do find it unfortunate because I don't think a lot of the players understand. I don't think they care either really about a lot of this like weird information to pay attention to it. Now, that's not an issue. I should first and foremost say I think it's perfectly fine if D&D players and DMs have different styles or different things they care about. I think end of the day, you should play D&D how you like to, so you have fun. I think my players should play how they want to have fun. If they just want to come to the table to play D&D because they like D&D and nothing else, let them come to the table. If they want to come and they want to just do combat because that's what makes them have fun, sure. If they want to come and only roleplay because that's what makes them have fun, sure. If they want to come and take notes and be very invested in information, that'd be great. But I don't think any of them are like me in that regards. So I feel like there's a lot of information I put into my world and a lot of things my NPCs say that is actually rather important, but I don't think they pick up on or they care to think more about it, which is not necessarily a problem. But the issue is whenever I end up revealing it to them, since they never cared or don't understand this initial, like these, since they won't remember the hints I gave them sessions down the road, it's not going to be nearly as powerful. For example, just throughout session 0.5, those two session 0.5s, and especially yesterday's session, there is so much information. There's so much information that hints at important stuff that will happen in the future. For example, none of my players, I don't think a single one of them picked up on this, but whenever Kronos the Shamed was going to go execute them, he said this. Actually, let me find it. Let me find the exact words, because I wrote it down because it was important. He said a phrase before he killed them, before he was going to kill them. And I don't think any of my players picked up on it or even like thought twice about it. Like they didn't think like, why is this guy saying this right now before we die? This is what Kronos the Shamed said. Before, this was as the guns and the knives were being pushed into their skin. He says, "Orbitus is ours. The world may have forgotten you, but I still remain. Your greatest mistake was failing to kill me. I will come for you, and I promise that I will not make the same mistake you did." So more or less, Kronos has said this, and this is really like out of nowhere. Like normally Kronos is talking to them, judging them, and sending them to die. And then he says this. Why? I don't think any of the players thought about it, but the players are level 1, and him saying this can be, if you think about it, it can make sense for him to say this, but at the same time, it doesn't. He tells these level 1 players he's about to execute, Orbitus is ours. Why would he say that? Maybe he means because him and his group are going to take over. Okay, that makes sense. Then he says, the world may have forgotten you, but I still remain. What? Is he saying like the world's going for this when we die, but he'll remember us? Doesn't really make sense. Why would he care? And then he says, your greatest mistake was failing to kill me. Now that kind of made sense. Since they failed to kill him, they're about to lose their lives. That made sense. But then he says this. He finishes it off by saying this, which should have blown the top off of it. He says, I will come for you, and I won't make the same mistake you did. This, you cannot, sitting there as a player or a character, you cannot hear this and somehow imagine what this means. He's about to kill you, so why is he going to come kill you? And why is he saying he's not going to make the same mistake that you did? Like why? This should blow it off the top. So none of the players even hinted. None of them seemed to care. I don't know if they were listening or what. Or maybe I just didn't portray it well enough. But this is very clearly him talking to someone else. He is not talking to them. I'm not going to say who he's talking to or why. And if my players watch this, I'm fine with them hearing this because it's important. But like this right here, like there was a lot of like smaller things I had hidden throughout what NPCs would respond with, what they would say, situations that happened in session 0.5, situations that happened in the backstory that led up to this that could be hints for stuff. There's a lot of stuff in there that can hint, that will hint and leads and starting to point in the direction of what's going on. But this right here, this is the one line that Kronos the Shamed, the big bad guy, said that takes the cake for the most important piece of information. And no one, not a damn one, thought about it, mentioned it. If someone wrote it in their notes, someone takes like actually decent notes, I'd be surprised. But there's a lot of things like that I add in here that I feel like, because we have different play styles, me as a DM and a player versus my players, I don't think they necessarily catch on to these things. And as such, it's not really a problem. I can't force them to. But as such, whenever I finally start revealing stuff, it probably won't feels important to them. They'll probably be like, okay, well, this is kind of not that cool. But in reality, there's like a million pieces of evidence that leads to this that they just don't pick up on. Now, I'm not trying to say all of it makes sense, but like, for example, Kronos the Shamed also said, whenever he was asking Kira, Mo5, his female elf, druid, Kira, Kronos asked, what is your last words, your last wish? And then Kira looked him dead in the eyes and said, I'll see you in hell. And then Kronos looked her in the eyes and said, hell doesn't exist. Now, I think that probably flew over their heads too. Why would Kronos the Shamed say hell doesn't exist? What does that mean? You see, there's a lot of things like that are small subliminal things that mean something. Now, I'm not trying to say that hell's not a thing, but the fact that why would he say that? Why would he respond to you saying that with that? Like, that's kind of a weird response, especially when he's just like being very serious. Like, why would he say that? So there's a lot of things in how the characters respond, the things they say. Sorry, how the NPCs respond, the things they say, little scenes that happen, things that happen due to certain people, and all this stuff that might seem not important, but there's probably been about 15 different hints, maybe even 15 to 20 different hints, phrases, sentences, responses that I've said in the last 3 sessions that is starting to point in certain directions for certain things. Now, they probably don't touch on to it, but I have to hope whenever I reveal things, they'll either have catched on to some stuff, or they'll be like, wow, so that's what that was about. That made sense. That's going to be several sessions down the road, but that's one of my things I worry about a little bit. I'm not going to stop doing it. It's just how I am as a DM. I just hope, I hope one day it works out, I hope, I hope it works out. But no, I think that's about it. Sessions 1 went about how I expected it to. I don't think it was necessarily the most fun in terms of D&D for my players. I think they probably enjoy it, and they probably will appreciate it later on, if they don't already. But that's to be expected. They didn't really play D&D. It was more like listening to a novel. But I think that was the best way to start this campaign. And from this point on, we're going to go more into... Basically, it starts out hard railroad novel, and every session is going to get more and more free, more or less, where it's like, I hope you know what you're doing. But I think that's it. The last thing I gotta say is, if any of my players are here, I hope you guys start fucking sleeping right, all right? You guys not sleeping right is going to affect your enjoyment of D&D. It's going to affect how much you enjoy it, how much you pay attention, how much you care. So you guys better stop sleeping at 8 o'clock. Stop sleeping at 6 o'clock when our game is at 12 at noon. Over here sleeping, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours? Come on now. I warned you. You better stop it. Anyway, it was fun. I'm going to keep doing these. The next ones will probably get shorter and shorter. This one's just long because I had to explain everything. But this is the DM Diary for Session 1. And next Tuesday, we'll be doing Session 2. If you're interested in watching these, I stream them. I'm going to upload them on YouTube. And the first one is probably the video is kind of stuffed, I think, due to frame drops. But that's what it is. Anyway, thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.